Hello, I have a very interesting video for you right now. This video is going to be about patterns in the Fibonacci sequence that are mirrored by patterns in astrology. And this is really very, very important because if astrology were just random nonsense, you would not expect to find these patterns within astrology that are similar to patterns found in one area of mathematics. Uh, so this is really providing evidence that something is going on in mathematics. Uh, so let me share my screen here and we will get started. It takes me a few seconds because I have to hide some panels so that I can see what I'm doing. But I think we're ready to go. I'm titling this presentation, The Unreasonable Effectiveness of Fibonacci Numbers in Astrology and the Natural Sciences. Some of you may recognize this as the title of a very famous paper published in 1960 by physicist Eugene Wigner. His paper was titled The Unreasonable Effectiveness of Mathematics in the Natural Sciences. And that paper was about the fact that once we set up a good mathematical model for something in physics, things that are true mathematically also tend to be true about aspects of the real world that those numbers correspond to. And it's just an uncanny correspondence between mathematics and physics that we see over and over again. In a similar way, there are many patterns in the Fibonacci sequence that are mirrored in astrology. And aside from suggesting that there is really something to astrology, that's not nonsense, it also suggests that any pattern in the Fibonacci sequence might have some correspondence to something important and valid in astrology. And that gives us directions for future research. Okay, now this presentation explores patterns in the Fibonacci sequence that reflect patterns found in astrology, and the presence of such patterns suggests that astrology is not a random collection of nonsense. Instead, since Fibonacci patterns are found throughout nature, the results presented here suggest that astrology too is a part of nature. A few of the observations I'll make are discoveries of my own, but most were discovered by others and are presented here with occasional modifications from me. Also, some of the people who have been working in this field are Russell Olhausen, Brian Ray Payne, Raphael Gilbrand, Naomi Bennett, Caleb Kent Grayson, Santino Mancuso, who is also known as David Cochran, and me, Christopher Benton. It's a small group, but this is research that can change the world. Okay. In 1170 of the Common Era, a man named Leonardo was born in Italy in the Republic of Pisa. He grew up to become one of the greatest mathematicians of the Middle Ages, and today he is known simply as Fibonacci, the son of Bonacci. He introduced algebra and Arabic numerals to Europeans, and he is very famous for the following problem that gives rise to what today we call the Fibonacci sequence. So, in this problem, a man put a male-female pair of newly born rabbits in a field. Rabbits take a month to mature before mating. 1 month after mating, females give birth to one male-female pair and then mate again. No rabbits die, and the question is, how many rabbit pairs are there after 1 year? Well, we'll represent the baby rabbits by two small letter R's. and the adult rabbits by 2 capital R's. Assuming that takes a month for each boy-girl pair of baby rabbits to mature and start reproducing at the rate of 1 boy-girl pair each month, the solution to the question of how many pairs of rabbits there are after n months is given by the Fibonacci sequence. This problem actually constructs the Fibonacci sequence for us. And in this sequence, all terms beyond the second are the sum of the previous 2 terms. So you can see some of the elements of the Fibonacci sequence down here. It starts out 1, 1, and then the next term is 1 plus 1. After that, we have 1 plus 2 is 3, 2 plus 3 is 5, 3 plus 5 is 8, and so on. Now, the reason this sequence gives a solution to our problem is you can notice up here, we start out in the first month with just 2 baby rabbits, so we have just 1 pair. By the second month, they've grown to adulthood, so we still have just 1 pair. They haven't reproduced yet. We get to the third month, the adults are still there, but now they produce a new batch of babies. So now we got 2 pairs. Go on to the third month. These rabbits are immortal, they never die. So in the third month, we got the original pair. Our babies grow up into adults, and the original adults give birth to a second pair, boy-girl pair of rabbits. So we got 3 pairs of rabbits in the third month, and then next month you'll have 5. And you can see you're getting back the elements of this Fibonacci sequence where once you get past the first 2 terms, each successive term is the sum of the previous 2. 1 plus 1 is 2. 1 plus 2 is 3. 2 plus 3 is 5, and so on. So if we count out 12 months here, in the 12th month, we'll have 144 pairs. And then 1 month after that, you'll have 233 pairs, 89 plus 144. Okay, these days, many people begin the Fibonacci sequence with 0 instead of 1, and we will do that too once we begin looking at Paisano periods. We'll define soon what that is, so don't worry about it for now. Thus, in most of our examples, the Fibonacci sequence will begin with 0, but in the first example, it will begin with 1. However, in both cases, once we get beyond the second term, the n plus 1 term is always the sum of the previous 2, and we can express this by this formula. A sub n minus 1 plus a sub n is equal to a sub n plus 1. Okay. If we begin our sequence with 1 and look at the sequence of ratios of consecutive terms, then these ratios get closer and closer to an irrational number known as the golden ratio. This number, which is approximately 1.618034, has long been considered the most pleasing ratio to look at. Consequently, its use is found in both architecture and art, and examples of both the Fibonacci sequence and the golden ratio are also found throughout nature. And this golden ratio, it's exactly equal to 1 plus square root of 5, whole thing divided by 2, comes out approximately equal to this decimal number. Okay, here's a couple of examples of the Fibonacci sequence in nature. On the left here, you have a tree branching, and if you count up the number of branches at each level, it often corresponds to the Fibonacci sequence, 1, 1, 2, 3, 5, 8, 13. If you look at the ancestry tree for a male bee, keep in mind that a male bee has only 1 parent. It comes from an unfertilized egg, so its only parent is the queen, the female. A female bee, however, has 2 parents, male and female. The female bee comes from a fertilized egg. So, in this ancestry tree, we can start out with 1 male bee. Previous generation, and its ancestry was just a single female bee. But that female had 2 ancestors, 2 parents, male and female. So in the next generation, we got 2 bees. Go back one more generation, this female has two parents, but this male has only one parent. So now you got three bees. And if you count up the number of bees in each generation, you're getting back that Fibonacci sequence, 1, 1, 3, 5, 8, and so on. Now, the golden ratio also appears quite a bit in nature. If you set up a rectangle where the ratio of base to height comes out to that golden ratio, we call that rectangle a golden rectangle. If you cut off a square from that golden rectangle, you'll be left with a smaller golden rectangle. Cut out another square and you get an even smaller golden rectangle. And these golden rectangles embedded with one another, they're going to define the spiral shape that we find throughout nature. So it's found in a spiral galaxy. Over here, it's found in a common seashell. We also find the golden ratio appearing in proportions of various parts of the human body. And if you put your first finger, kind of scrunch it up like this, you're defining another golden rectangle, and that golden rectangle fits inside a little larger golden rectangle. Here I've got a plant pattern, which results in kind of a five-pointed star. And let's see if I drew straight lines to connect the vertices of the star and connect them around this way to get a pentagon. If you take the ratio of any length to the next smaller length in that star or pentagon, the ratio is going to come out to the golden ratio. So Fibonacci sequence, golden ratio, they appear throughout nature. And because that ratio is considered so pleasing to look at, we find it occurring in art also. It occurs in the Parthenon, in this famous Japanese painting called The Wave, and also in the Mona Lisa. Okay, two things need to be explained before we can begin looking at the links between the Fibonacci sequence and astrology. The first is modular arithmetic, and the second is what a Paisano period is. Let me take a quick drink of water here. Now, modular arithmetic is what many people know as clock arithmetic. It is a form of arithmetic that can turn an infinite sequence into a repeating cycle. It does this by starting over once a certain threshold is achieved. Just like on our clock, we get to 12, we start over. More specifically, if we want to find the value of some number modulo n, then we simply find the remainder after dividing our number by n. So, strictly speaking, if we wanted the numbers on our clock to reflect arithmetic modulo 12, up at the top, we would have 0 instead of 12. Since you divide by 12 by 12, you get a remainder of 0. But everything else would remain the same. We go 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11, and then you start over at 0. And that is arithmetic done modulo 12. Okay. Now, 17 modulo 10 is going to be 7. That's the remainder you get if you divide by 10. 17 modulo 9 is going to be 8. You get a remainder of 8 when you divide 17 by 9. And similarly, 17 modulo 5 is going to be 2. 5 goes into 17 3 times to give us 15. Subtract that off, we're left with 2. So the numbers 7, 8, and 2 are the respective remainders when we divide 17 in turn by 9, 10, 9, and 5. And that's how finding a value modulo a certain number works. Okay, if you begin with the Fibonacci sequence, and if for some natural number n, you find the value of each number of your Fibonacci sequence modulo n, it can be shown that this procedure will always produce a finite sequence of values that repeats indefinitely. The length of this sequence is called the Paisano period of n. And we will be particularly interested in the Paisano periods and sequences for the values of 5, 9, 10, and 81. Furthermore, for convenience, I'll use the term Paisano period to refer not only to the length of the finite sequence produced, but also to the elements of that sequence in the order that they occur. Thus, Paisano 2 will be used by us to refer to both the length 3 of the sequence 0, 1, 1 and to the sequence itself. And for reference, on the left is a table for the Paisano periods for the numbers from 1 to 144. This table comes from Wikipedia. And from this table, we can see that the Paisano period for 5 is 20, it's 24 for 9, 60 for 10, and 216 for 72 plus 9, which will be 81. Now let's talk about the planet ladder, and we'll see how the Fibonacci sequence fits into this planet ladder. Now the planet ladder, it's an old diagram that explains through the ancient planetary relationships. I need to rephrase this. The planet ladder is a diagram that explains the ancient planetary relationships of the signs. It is often drawn with Taurus rising, and you can see Taurus over here. You can see how symmetry is used to explain why Mercury rules both Gemini and Virgo, Venus rules both Taurus and Libra, Mars rules both Aries and Scorpio, Jupiter rules Pisces and Sagittarius, and Saturn rules Aquarius and Capricorn. These were the planetary rulers before we discovered planets beyond Saturn. And it's really very nice and a very nice symmetry. Sun and moon both have to do with consciousness and perception, so they're kind of two sides of the same coin, and they go together as rulers of Leo and Cancer. Next, we have Mercury as ruler of both Virgo and Gemini. Venus is ruler of Libra and Taurus. Mars, in older times, as ruler of both Scorpio and Aries. Jupiter in older times as the ruler of Sagittarius and Pisces. Saturn in older times as the ruler of Capricorn and Aquarius. And so this symmetry helped explain the structure of these ancient planetary rulerships. Now, the planet ladder is also sometimes drawn with Scorpio rising and the sun and the moon at the top. I see this as an arrangement for the creation of the universe, since Scorpio represents the powerful energies of the Big Bang. Remember, Scorpio is ruled by Pluto, which is death and rebirth. And what is the Big Bang if not the rebirth of things? And then Scorpio is followed by Sagittarius. That symbolizes an expanding universe, the moments after the Big Bang. In Capricorn, ruled by Saturn, it signifies the crystallization of energy into matter. And certainly that is something that we can all associate with Saturn. Now, in contrast, Aries rising may represent the birth of something in a universe that already exists. Of course, in astrology, most of us routinely think of the zodiac as beginning with Aries. And when I have Aries at the start of my zodiac for some procedure, I'll call it an Aries zodiac. But this planetary ladder perhaps works best with a Scorpio zodiac, a zodiac that begins with Scorpio and goes Scorpio, Sagittarius, Capricorn, and so on in the counterclockwise direction. Okay. And in the Scorpio zodiac, you could also think of this as this planetary ladder as representing at the bottom we have physical matter, where everything is restricted and separated from one another. And as we move up this ladder, we're moving from awareness of material things back to pure consciousness, a oneness instead of a separation with things. And now, after I have one more sip of water, we'll start with the planet ladder that's shown with Scorpio rising. So here's our planet ladder, Saturn at the bottom, Sun and Moon at the top, Scorpio as the start of the zodiac, and symmetry explains the ancient planetary rulerships. Okay, the next thing I'm going to do is I'm going to write the first 24 elements of the Fibonacci sequence, starting with 1 in Virgo, and then proceeding counterclockwise. So we're going to use a Fibonacci sequence that starts with 1, and additionally, we'll assign 2 numbers of the Fibonacci sequence to each sign. Why do we do this? Primarily just because it works. But we could also see this as a reminder that succeeding terms in the Fibonacci sequence are generally the sum of the previous 2. Okay, so that's one good reason for putting 2 numbers in each sign. But why do we start with Virgo? Well, again, it works. You could also start with Cancer and then go around in the clockwise rather than the counterclockwise direction. That works also. And in his video, Santino Mancuso, and I think Russell Oldhausen probably also began with Cancer and went around in the clockwise direction. But I'm going to start with Virgo. I'm going to use a Scorpio zodiac and put 2 numbers in each sign. So we got 1, 1, 2, 3, 5, 8, 13, 21. This is just our standard Fibonacci sequence going around the zodiac. And when we get this last sign filled in with numbers, we're done. Okay, now the next step is to add the 2 numbers placed in each sign together. Thus for Virgo, we got 1 plus 1 is 2. For Libra, 2 plus 3 is 5. For Scorpio, 5 plus 8 equals 13. If I go back here, you can see, for instance, 34 plus 55 will be 89. 55 plus 89 gives us 144, the next number associated with the sign, but you add these 2 numbers together. Let's see, you're going to get, let's see, 9 plus 4 is 13, 8 plus 4 is 12, plus 1 is 3. Carry a 1, we get 233. So I add these 2 together, I'll get 89, not only over here, but also 89 for Capricorn. And then I'll get 233, not only over here, but also as our number for Aquarius. That's what I've got on this slide. Okay, now we got at least 1, maybe 2 more transformations to go. Just 1 more. For the final transformation, we're going to rewrite each number modulo 9. For example, the number for Capricorn, what we had down here was 89. And this number modulo 9 is 8. That means if you divide 89 by 9, it goes in there 9 times. 9 times 9 is 81. 89 minus 81 gives you 8. So this is that number converted to modulo 9. This is the remainder you get when you divide 89 by 9. Likewise, 233, the number for Aquarius, is equal to 8 modulo 9. And we do this for all the numbers going around. And when we look at what happens, we have a symmetry that models the traditional planetary ladder. Sun and Moon go together as our instruments for conscious awareness. They're 1 and 1. Mercury rules both Gemini and let's see, Gemini and Virgo, and they're both 2. Venus rules the next 2 signs, and numerically, they're both 5. Mars rules the next 2 signs, and from the Fibonacci sequence, we got a 4 for both of those signs. Jupiter rules these next 2 signs, And numerically, they both came out to 7. Saturn rules each of the last two signs, and numerically, from our Fibonacci sequence, we got the number 8. So this Fibonacci pattern right here, it mirrors the pattern we have in the planet ladder. And this is the first of several patterns we'll find between astrology and the Fibonacci sequence. But interestingly, the planetary numbers found for this planet ladder seem to also correspond to their interpretations in vibrational astrology, which is a particular form of harmonic astrology. For example, the number 1 represents conjunction or union, and the sun and moon represent the use of our conscious awareness that connects us with everything, right? With our instruments of perception, we unite with everything we see and hear. Consciousness creates unions, and that's represented by the number 1 for sun and moon. The number 2 for Mercury corresponds to overcoming oppositions, and Mercury helps us reconcile opposites through logical thinking and communication. I'm going to skip to the number 4 and then go back to 5 for Venus. The number 4, which corresponds to Mars, in astrology, it represents squares and struggles, and that certainly conforms to the planet Mars in astrology. Now, if we go back to the number 5, Venus, that corresponds to that feeling of playfulness, joy, and euphoria following, for instance, a successful first date. Also, the diagram on the left shows how the distance between the Sun and Venus changes during its orbit. And this diagram defines a 5-pointed star and pentagon. Additionally, if you take the ratio of any long side to the next longest side in a pentagram, then that ratio will always be the golden ratio. Okay, so 5 goes along for Venus and the Fibonacci sequence, and it goes along with Venus geometrically when we look at this planetary orbit pattern. Now, the number 7, Jupiter, it corresponds to the kind of focus one has before a first date. And with Jupiter involved, this suggests a possibility of a larger reality coming into view if the date is successful. Remember, Jupiter is an expansion, learning new things, going into new territory. And that is the whole point of dating someone. You're looking for a relationship. And that relationship, if it is successful and grows, it completely changes your world. It expands your world. And lastly, the number 8 represents semi-squares in astrology and the need to build. And Saturn, of course, is the master builder among the planets. So with Mars, you're feeling some tension, some energy. You got to do something. With Saturn, there's a little bit more focus on what you're going to do. You're going to construct something. You're going to create some sort of structure here. And that's what the number 8 represents. Okay, now let's see how we get a 12-sign zodiac out of the Fibonacci sequence. There's actually several Paisano periods that can be used for this, but we'll use modulo 10. So many of our subsequent calculations will be done modulo 10, and the Paisano period for 10 is 60. Thus, on the left are the first 60 terms of the Fibonacci sequence. If we begin our sequence with 0, we'll also let 0 correspond to 0 degrees Aries. So we're first going to put these numbers around an Aries zodiac, a zodiac that starts at Aries. Since we have 60 numbers, you could actually fit 5 of them with each sign. We got 12 signs, 5 times 12 is 60. Before we do that, though, we're going to rewrite each Fibonacci number, each of these guys, modulo 10. And when we do that, notice that the numbers 0 and 5 occur exactly 12 times and are equally spaced. thus corresponding to the 12 astrological signs. Additionally, with the cardinal numbers all starting at 0, this suggests the specialness that these signs hold within astrology. So 0 and 5, they appear exactly 12 times in this sequence and exactly at the beginning of each sign. And it goes in this direction: Aries, Taurus, Gemini, Cancer, Leo, Virgo, Libra, Scorpio, Sagittarius, Capricorn, Aquarius, and Pisces. Okay. Furthermore, for each sequence of 5 numbers from the table on the previous slide, each sequence can be considered as a 5-digit code for the corresponding sign. So we have 5 digits here for Aries, 01123. That becomes his first 5-digit code. Next, for Taurus, we have 58314. That becomes our next 5-digit code. There are other sequences besides Paisano 10 that contain a pattern of 12, but we'll stick with Paisano 10 since it is also the source of several other patterns that are found in astrology. Okay, now let's see how we get the elements: fire, earth, air, and water. Okay, to find a pattern that mimics the 4 elements in astrology, we'll begin with our 5-digit modulo 10 codes for Aries through Pisces that we present at the end of the last section. So same table here. 01123 is the code for Aries, 58314 is the code for Taurus, and so on. Okay, what we're going to do now is we're going to group these codes and signs by element. So here I've got the 3 fire signs and their 5-digit codes, the 3 earth signs, their 5-digit codes, the 3 air signs and their 5-digit codes, the 3 water signs and their 5-digit codes. And now watch what magically happens. We're going to take each of these codes, which we got from the Fibonacci numbers modulo 10, and we're going to redo them as modulo 5. So take every code here and look and see what remainders you get if you divide each number by 5, which you can also do it by just subtracting 5 in this case. So for 5, 6, 1, 7, 8, write those numbers modulo 5, you'll get 0, 1, 1, 2, 3. This was for Leo, and there you have it for Leo. When we do this across the board for all of these 5-digit codes, look at the pattern we find. All of the fire signs have the same 5-digit code. All of the earth signs have the same 5-digit code. All of the air signs have the same 5-digit code. And all of the water signs have the same 5-digit code. So this is showing how fire, earth, air, and water are encoded within the Fibonacci sequence. Now we can do a similar analysis by pairing our 5-digit modulo 10 codes with a zodiac that begins at Scorpio instead of Aries. So originally I had 01123 corresponding to Aries, 58314 corresponding to Taurus. That's in my Aries zodiac, but in the Scorpio zodiac, that seems to relate more to the Big Bang, the actual creation of the universe. The Scorpio code is now 01123, and 58314 is now the Sagittarius code instead of the Taurus code. Okay, and I think of the Scorpio zodiac as representing the zodiac for the creation of the universe. In contrast, I interpret the Aries zodiac as referring to new beginnings in an already existing universe. Now, in our Scorpio zodiac, if I take our 5-digit modulo 10 codes for each element, they can be arranged as they are in this table on the left. Okay. And let's see. And I've got my titles here wrong. Sorry, I need to change that. These should now be water. This is going to be fire. This is going to be earth, and these are going to be air. So I have to change the headings here. Sorry about that. There's always one or two typos left, no matter how hard I work on getting rid of them. Hopefully I'll connect that in the following slides, which I do here. I've got water, fire, earth, and air, water, fire, earth, and air. Okay, if I convert each of these modulo 10 codes to modulo 5, then once again, we're going to get the same numbers for each element. All of the water signs get converted to 0, 1, 1, 2, 3, all of the fire to 0, 3, 3, 1, 4, all of the earth to 0, 4, 4, 3, 2, all of the air signs get converted to 0, 2, 2, 4, 1. Now, if we add the 5 numbers for each sign together and reduce the result modulo 10, then we presumably get a number for each element at the time of primordial creation. We'll use these numbers next to find a pattern for the 3 modes, cardinal, fixed, and mutable. So using the Scorpio zodiac, which I postulate corresponds to the actual creation of the universe, we get that water corresponds to the number 7, fire to 1, earth to 3, air to 6. And I get that by adding up these numbers here. So for instance, if I add 0 plus 3 plus 3 plus 1 plus 4, that's going to add up to 11, and 11 modulo 10 is just 1. If I add up the numbers for Earth, 0 plus 4 plus 4 plus 3 plus 2, that adds up to 13. 13 modulo 10 is just 3. 0 plus 2 plus 2 plus 4 plus 1, that adds up to 9. 9 modulo 10 is 9. Of course, 0 plus 1 plus 1 plus 2 plus 3 is 7, which modulo 10 is still 7. But the point is, these are going to be numerical codes for the elements based upon what we call the Scorpio zodiac, which I believe represents things at the very beginning, at the Big Bang. Okay, now let's see how we can get the modes, cardinal, fixed, and mutable out of all of this. Well, the Fibonacci pattern for the 3 modes, cardinal, fixed, and mutable, involves both the Aries zodiac and the Scorpio zodiac. So I'm going to begin with the 5-digit codes modulo 10 for the Aries zodiac grouped by element. So now I've got fire signs, earth signs, air signs, water signs grouped over here, where these were these 5-digit codes we got for an Aries zodiac. And remember how we got these codes. We took our Fibonacci sequence. We converted all the numbers in the Fibonacci sequence modulo 10. That gives us a sequence of 60 numbers that keeps repeating. And we put 5 numbers in each zodiac sign. So the first 5 numbers go with Aries, the next 5 numbers go with Taurus, next 5 with Gemini, next 5 with Cancer, and so on. Okay, now I'm going to regroup these 5-digit codes together by mode instead of element. So I'll put the cardinal signs and their 5-digit codes all together. I'll put the fixed signs and their codes together, the mutable signs and their codes together. This is all done using an Aries zodiac, where the first code for Aries is 0, 1, 1, 2, 3. And that's the first code in our 60-term Paisano 10 period. Okay, again, remember, using a Scorpio zodiac, we got these numerical codes for water, fire, earth, and air, 7, 1, 3, and 9. Interestingly, notice how these numbers, they appear in some of the columns. There's a little bit of foreshadowing for you. Okay, now, what are we going to do? Well, for cardinal signs, we start with the 5-digit code for Aries. We're always going to start with our fire sign. And then we'll multiply that by the fire number modulo 10. Well, the fire number down here is 1. So if I multiply my fire code by 1, I get back the same code. No surprise there. But if we now multiply our modulo 10, if we multiply modulo 10, the Aries code by 7 for water, and notice that 7 here represents water. So here's what I'm going to do. I'm going to take the code I have for cardinal fire, multiply that code by 7, reduce the result modulo 10. That gives me 07741. Let me go back a slide. 07741, that is the code for Cancer. So I multiplied by the water number and I got back the water sign. If I take my 5-digit code from the Aries zodiac and Paisano 10, if I take that code and multiply it by 9, which is the code, the single-digit code for air, reduce the result modulo 10, I get back 09987. That is the code for Libra, the cardinal air sign. And if I multiply my original fire sign code 01123 for Aries, if I multiply that by 3, which corresponds to Earth, I get 03369. That is the code for Capricorn, which is cardinal Earth. Okay, now we can do the same thing with fixed signs and with mutable signs. In each grouping, we start with the 5-digit code that we have for the fire sign. For fixed signs, that would be the code for Leo, which is 56178. Multiply that by 1 modulo 10, you get back the same result. No change. But multiply by 3 modulo 10, 3 corresponds to Earth, and you get back the code for Taurus, which is fixed Earth. You multiply your Leo, your fire code by 7, 7 is water, you're going to get back the 5-digit code for Scorpio, which is fixed water. And then you multiply your Leo fire code by 9, which corresponds to air, you get back your 5-digit code for the air sign. And the same thing's going to happen with mutable signs. In each of these groupings, you start with the 5-digit code for the fire sign. Here it's 51673. If I multiply this code by 9, 9 corresponds to air, you'll get back, when you reduce it modulo 10, you'll get 59437. And that is mutable air, which is Gemini. Amazing. So this holds throughout. This is a very strong connection between the Fibonacci sequence and both the Aries zodiac and the Scorpio zodiac. So the Fibonacci sequence, the Paisano 10 period, and the Aries zodiac and the Scorpio zodiac, they all work together to produce some of these phenomenal patterns between astrology and the Fibonacci sequence. Okay, let's see how we can get masculine and feminine signs out of all of this. Well, in astrology, the fire and air signs are called positive or masculine. The water and earth signs are called negative or feminine. The energy of positive or masculine signs is more outward. The energy of water or feminine signs is more inward. To find a Fibonacci connection to this classification, we'll begin with the 5-digit modulo 5 codes for the Scorpio zodiac. Okay, so these, I began with the Scorpio zodiac, put my modulus 10 codes around that zodiac. So that gave me 5 numbers in each sign since I got 60 numbers and Paisano 10 in that Paisano 10 sequence. And then I converted those numbers to modulo 5. And that gave me the same 5-digit code for each element: water, fire, earth, and air. You can see they've all got the same. But these codes are derived not from the Aries zodiac, but from the zodiac that begins with Scorpio. Okay, next, let me go back one. Yep, that's right. Observe, if I multiply each of the numbers in the code for air by 4, and then express the result modulo 5, you get the code for fire. So the air code is 04432. I multiply that by 4. I reduce it modulo 5, I get 01123. Let's see, which is going to be the code for fire. Likewise, if I take the code for fire, 01123, multiply it by 4, reduce that result modulo 5, I get the code for air, 04432. So for example, let me just do the last one here, or the last two. 4 times 2 is 8. Take away 5, you're left with 3. 4 times 3 is 12. Well, you can take away 5 from that twice, and you're going to be left with 2. Okay, so this is connecting fire and air signs with one another. And the same thing happens with earth and water signs. If I take this 5-digit code, which I got for water signs, 02241, multiply it by 4, reduce it modulo 5, I'll get the code for earth signs. Okay, let's just do 1 or 2 here. 4 times 2 is 8. Divide 8 by 5, the remainder is 3, so we get 3, 3. 4 times 4 is 16. Divide that by 5, you get a remainder of 1. 4 times 1 is 4, it stays the same. 4 times 0 is 0, it stays the same. So again, we've got a connection between earth and water signs. This procedure, take the code for water, multiply by 4, reduce mod 5, that gives you back the code for earth. Alternatively, start with the code for earth, multiply by 4, reduce mod 5, you get the code for water. It's amazing. Okay, the last thing I want to go over is something from Vedic astrology, the nakshatras. They are also going to relate to a pattern, a remarkable pattern in the Fibonacci sequence. So in Vedic astrology, the zodiac is divided into 27 lunar mansions called nakshatras. This division is based on the 27-day length of the sidereal month. Now, each nakshatra is then further divided into 4 sections called padas. So you're going to have 4 padas in each nakshatra. And this results in a division of the zodiac into 108 padas. 4 times 27 gives us 108. And furthermore, here's another typo. I said each sign of the zodiac is comprised of 5 padas. That should be 9 padas. So yet another typo I need to go back and change. So sorry about that. Just mentally change this to a 9. We're going to have 4 padas in each nakshatra, 9 padas in each zodiac sign. Okay. We will find a pattern related to these subdivisions if we construct Paisano 81. This Paisano period has a cycle of 216 elements that repeat. And so we'll do the following. Put 2 consecutive numbers of Paisano 81 in each pada beginning with 0 degrees Aries. So we're using an Aries zodiac here. Add the two numbers in each pada together to reduce the period to 108. So that's going to reduce the total number of values to deal with from 216 to 108. And then I'm going to express all the results modulo 3. That's interesting. Well, if we look at the results for the first 6 nakshatras, the patterns are already very clear. Each nakshatra is coded by the sequence 1020. This is where all the numbers have been reduced modulo 3. So what remains is going to be either a 0, a 1, or a 2. Okay, so again, what we did was we had these 216 numbers in Paisano 81. We spread them around an Aries zodiac, a zodiac starting with Aries. And that is going to give us, well, we have 216 numbers, but then we add each pair of numbers together. We add the first two numbers together, the second two numbers together. That reduces things to 108 numbers, which corresponds to the 108 padas. So each pada will have had two numbers that were added together. And then we express all the results modulo 3, and the result is that each nakshatra will have this pattern for the 4 padas, 1020, 1020, and so on. This also means that the first pada in each nakshatra, it's going to be represented by the number 1, the second by the number 0, the third by the number 2, the fourth by the number 0 again. Okay, here I've got correct. There are 9 padas in each zodiac sign. So once more, going back here, 5 padas, that should be a 9. If we display our modulo 3 padas in groups of 9, then we get a numeric pattern that repeats every 4 signs. So I've just got patterns of 1s and 0s here, 1020, 10201. And by the time I get through this 4th sign, the sequence is going to start over with 1020, 10201. Okay. Additionally, we have a different sequence for each of the elements because these first 4 signs represent Aries, Taurus, Gemini, and Cancer. We got different sequences, but these sequences repeat for the next 4 signs of Leo, Virgo, Libra, and Scorpio. So we have specific 9-digit codes for the fire signs, for the earth signs, the air signs, and the water signs. Okay. Furthermore, if for each sign we take the sum of the modulo 3 padas, so just add up all of these numbers, and then display that sum modulo 3, you're going to get back the same sequence, 1020, that occurs in each nakshatra. This suggests that the 4 padas in each nakshatra, that they're related to the 4 elements of fire, earth, air, and water. You know, this sequence repeats for every sequence of 4 signs, and the 4 signs go in the order of fire, earth, air, and water. So we got 1020. That sequence represents those 4 elements. And that's the sequence we have in each nakshatra. 4 padas in a nakshatra. And finally, we note that the above sums modulo 3 are 0 for feminine signs, and they're non-zero for masculine signs. So we're getting, in a different way, some differentiation between the feminine signs and the masculine signs. So here I've got some conclusions. Now, critics might say that all I have done is akin to looking at clouds. or to identify random images that occur. However, I would reply that nothing is further from the truth. Thing, I already know what astrological elements I want to find patterns for. Thus, this is more like going outside looking at clouds and expecting not expecting to just identify random images, but expecting to find specific images, such as not only a detailed image of your house, but also images of every single room inside your house. In other words, the big difference here is I know beforehand what patterns I'm looking for. I'm not just randomly looking at clouds and randomly uh, finding images. Okay. Furthermore, not every Paisano period easily yields the kinds of patterns we're looking for. And so it's not the case that we can simply pick any Paisano period at random and discover patterns related to traditional astrology. In other words, it's unlikely that the patterns we're seeing are simply chance occurrences. Instead, they are patterns that reflect the basics of astrology. And consequently, they tell us that astrology has a structure similar to that found within the sequence of Fibonacci numbers. All right. A question that has to be asked, though, is not only why do Fibonacci patterns appear in astrology, but also why do Fibonacci patterns appear throughout nature? The answer appears to be unknown, but I would point out that just as the Fibonacci sequence is defined by the recursive relation a sub n plus 1 plus a sub n equal a sub n plus 1, a sub n minus 1 plus a sub n equal a sub n plus 1, so might we think of reality as being defined by a similar recursive relation, namely past plus present equal future. Now, a lot more dots will have to be connected to, another typo, to verify that this is why Fibonacci patterns occur in both nature and astrology, but this looks like a good starting point. A lot more work has to be done on this, but I suspect that the relationship of past to present to future is what is mirrored in the Fibonacci sequence when we say things, for instance, like 2 plus 3 is 5, and that's how we get 5 as a Fibonacci number from the previous two Fibonacci numbers. I suspect that's going to be important. But anyway, as I said, a lot of dots have to be filled in by me or other people. Okay, and one last point I would make is that just as any pattern that appears in a mathematical model for physics tends to have relevance for the physical world, so do I suspect that any pattern in the Fibonacci sequence will also signify some application to astrology. In other words, the adventure has just begun. Okay, I think this is my last slide. It is, but let me go back to one other slide here just for a second. Keep going back. More. Here to my slide where I show all these Paisano periods. We have examined just a few of these Paisano periods, and we found very interesting patterns that correspond to astrology and to the zodiac. And we have found that what I call the Scorpio zodiac is also important, not just the Aries zodiac that starts with Aries rising. We have all these other Paisano periods out here that haven't even been explored yet. But the hypothesis is that they are going to have patterns which also have relevance for astrology. Okay, and this table covers only the first 144 Paisano periods. How many Paisano periods are there? There are an infinite number of Paisano periods. So, again, we're just at the beginning of what could be an incredible adventure. And I think it is highly unlikely that you could find these correspondences between astrology and the Fibonacci sequence, unless astrology was basically true and also a part of nature, based on nature, just as plants and other natural structures are. So this is stuff that only a few people are ready to work with this stuff at this point because it involves a good deal of knowledge about both astrology and mathematics. But at the same time, I think this is stuff which is extremely important because it takes a mathematical model, the Fibonacci sequence, which is already known to be connected to the natural world, and shows it's also connected with astrology. This is one way in which you get independent verification of astrology, and a way in which you get evidence that astrology is also a part of the natural world and not something that we just made up. Okay, let me stop sharing my screen now. And I'm back. I hope you found that interesting. I hope you found it enlightening. Even if you're not a mathematician or a whiz at mathematics, I hope you found some things in here which will be of value to you. I hope at the very least you come away with an understanding that there are these mathematical patterns in mathematics, Fibonacci sequence in particular, which are mirrored in astrology. And that means astrology has structure, which is not just random noise, not just random nonsense. And this is what can be a very fruitful area of research. There's a lot more work to be done. But this, along with statistics, along with extreme case sampling and some other things, and along with work being done in disciplines that already are accepted by the sciences, like chronobiology and heliobiology, all of these things are working together to tell us that there is something to astrology. It's not necessarily the case that every single little thing every astrologer has said is true, and I doubt that it is, but it is telling us that a lot of the basics, foundations are solid and that they work. So I hope you enjoyed that. I hope you enjoyed that you join me again for future videos. And for now, I'll just say so long and be well.